Welcome back to the Dark Reading News Desk here at RSA. Terry Sweeney, contributing editor to Dark Reading, and joining me now is Dr. Renée Burton, Vice President of Infoblox Threat Intel. Renée, nice to see you back on the Dark Reading News Desk. Welcome.
Yeah, thank you for having me. It's great to be back.
We were talking in this very space just a year ago about how DNS was the underlying security factor, not just in the hunt, but also the discovery of threat actors. But before we go there, let's do something more recent, which is the recent release by Infoblox of this report titled Muddling Meerkat, the Great Firewall Manipulator. Tell us a bit more about how you found this, what this group is, what they're suspected of doing, and how the industry should respond.
Yeah. So Muddling Meerkat is a Chinese nation-state actor. And they have the ability to control the Great Firewall, which is how you connect them to the nation state. Okay. We discovered them in anomalous DNS records, specifically in mail records, which are called MX records. So it was discovered through anomalies, and they create these fake mail server answers that we can see through a variety of things. But one of the most amazing things about them is it's so clever, you cannot see their operations in full from any vantage point on the internet. So then we had to collaborate with other vendors to get a broader picture of what was going on, but it was still murky enough that when we published it in part, we were saying, look, here's what we can see is happening,
right?
But what do you all see?
Right.
And one of the cool things was I had a person reach out to me on Mastodon and say, hey, I can see this. So we now know as a direct result that in addition to the DNS, which we were able to see and discover, they are actually doing mail operations using those fake records. The fake records are essentially somehow telling a bot or otherwise what to do, and that's sending mail records. We don't know the motive still, and we don't know the full scope. But the idea that you have a Chinese operation that's been operating since October 2019
wow.
is a really long time,
yeah.
And it's deliberate and ongoing. So there's a reason for it.
Is this one of these persistent, dormant sort of activities where maybe they're just awaiting a specific opportunity? What's your sense of that?
From what we can see, it actually operates on a fairly regular basis, but it comes up in like 12 to 72 hour pop-ups, okay, which is where the meerkat part comes from, this kind of like ding-a-ding-a-ding-a-ding-a that we can see in our network.
Okay. And how interesting that so many organizations have like a piece of the fingerprint that they leave the places that they've been.
Yeah, it's crazy. And then no one can tell what's really going on. It's amazing.
How did your DNS-focused research enable this discovery? Can you say more about that?
Yep. So when we look at this sort of activity, as well as other actors that we've published, like last year we initially published Decoy Dog, and I think that's what we talked about first last year. We are being able to see these because we're really intensely and only focused on threat in DNS. So instead of thinking about how can I reverse engineer this or how can I go scrape some phishing pages, we're really looking at how do I see how threats manifest themselves within DNS. And we're very fortunate in that we have, I think, the four things that make that possible to work really well. We have data science expertise, we have threat intelligence expertise, we have DNS expertise, which is really hard to come by.
It seems to be your key differentiator.
Yeah, that combined with, you might have DNS expertise, some people have that, but then they don't have visibility. Okay. So we are the recursive resolvers, so we actually see all the things, and that gives us that extra push over the edge.
And partners, third parties, other ecosystem providers that you have apparently some relationships with, there's a lot of cross-pollination, it sounds like, as well.
Yeah, when we go to do a publication or talk to people, you're all brothers in arms in the sense that you're all working for this more secure world. And so just normal practice is to let people know what's going on and say, have you seen this before? Do you have any insights?
Shifting gears slightly, why did Infoblox Threat Intel migrate from being a threat aggregator to being a threat intel creator. What was behind that?
Well, it's very simple, Terry. Aggregation doesn't work. It really comes down to that. So this whole concept that more is more, everyone's like, oh, more is more. I'm going to do. When you're talking about DNS, which is the front door of your network, and you're talking about this giant hammer, more is more will kill you every time. You are going to inevitably block Google, Facebook, Cloudflare, all these things. And so what we had to do was say, we can't spend our time whack-a-moling, which everyone does, and we have to reimagine what Intel looks like for our product.
Okay. This obviously changes how you use DNS-based threat intelligence to protect customers. Can you say a bit about that?
Yep, so Infoblox is in that DDI, DNS, DHCP, and IP management space, and in particular in DNS detection and response. Some people now are using the terms protective DNS that comes through government. And the most simple way is also DNS firewall. It's a set of block lists that you're able to use at the DNS resolver point to make a decision as to whether or not I should allow that domain to resolve, or I should redirect it or say no data. And that is because we know that most malware has to use DNS. It does.
Renée, talk to us a bit about the highlights of zero-day DNS, what it is, how it differs from your existing security capabilities.
We really want to protect customers through the entire life cycle of a domain, through that whole period that the threat actor is operating. And so we recently launched a capability called zero-day DNS to get us as far to the left as possible.
Okay.
So you might have heard in the last year or two there's been some data breaches.
A few.
Have you heard that?
Some headlines, vague things, Okta and...
Something like that. And you might have heard that most of them are multi-factor authentication, spoofing, kind of targeted attacks. So what we saw with those in the news, but also within our own customers, was that we were identifying suspicious domains that were going to be used in these, but unfortunately, we were identifying them a couple of hours after the attack. So what we had to say was, okay, how do we roll that back that we can identify them as quickly as possible? The actors we saw were registering and using these domains specifically for this type of social engineering MFA attack very, very quickly. I register, I use within an hour or two. So what we had to do was figure out how can you technically pull back and determine whether you've ever seen a domain before or not. This actually ends up being really hard, but we solved the problem and we now have that capability for our cloud customers.
Okay. I've heard you say, or other Infoblox colleagues talk about how actors begin with DNS. Take a deeper cut at that and tell us what that really means.
Yeah, so most actors are going to have to use DNS in some fashion or another, right? In particular, they need a domain name. So they register in DNS, and then they have human behaviors. They might register one domain, they might register 1,000 or 10,000 domains, but they exhibit human behaviors in how they start. And all of that is beginning their operations, and that's where we look at that entire life cycle of how they're operating. Then we get a hold of them when we watch them as they evolve and change their operations through the rest of the life cycle when they drop those domains.
Right. Renée, once again, you have blown my mind with the insights and capabilities around DNS for not just threat hunting, but also for circumventing attacks, those kinds of things. Thank you so much for joining us again on Dark Reading News Desk.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
We've been talking with Dr. Renée Burton, Vice President of Threat Intel at Infoblox. This has been Terry Sweeney for the Dark Reading News Desk. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next time.